I wonder what you are like with directions. If you're lost somewhere, maybe the smart sat-nav in your car isn't working for some reason, and you reach for a paper map that's been lurking in your glove box in your car, probably since the 1980s, and so most of the roads aren't on it anyway. What do you do? There is a cliche that men don't like to stop to ask for directions. I must say there was a very, very sexist congregation here at 9 o'clock, and they all nodded at that. And I must admit that I'm not very good when people give me verbal directions. I often forgot what came after that first instruction of turn right at the White Horse. I sort of seem to stop listening, or certainly taking it on board. I'm much better if people give me a paper map or they sketch something on the back of an envelope. Rather helpfully, though, in today's gospel, the need for remembering whether to turn left or right is eliminated, because the promise is that the crooked roads will become straight. Furthermore, there's no need to worry about potholes, as the rough ways will be made smooth. Though I have a sneaking suspicion that Isaiah isn't actually talking about the state of the tarmac on our roads. Indeed, we're not talking about that sort of direction at all. We're talking about a different sort of route or way. Directions are still involved, but these are spiritual directions. This morning's gospel passage stops before we find out the nature and content of John's teaching, because that's not the reason for its inclusion in the list for Advent readings. No, John's teaching will wait for another time, as today what is important is that John is a messenger sent ahead, rather like a vehicle sent ahead to clear the way for a large lorry. He's pointing to something much more impactful that's on its way. He's telling those who hear him that the Lord is on his way. Now, it might seem strange to have this passage in the lead up to Christmas, as if we continue reading, in a few verses we'll see that Jesus is not a baby, but he's already 30 years old and is about to ask John to baptize him. Surely this reading would be one that we should have after Christmas, when we mark the baptism of Christ. Or possibly one that we have at the start of Lent, as we think about Jesus' time in the wilderness following his baptism, where of course he fasted from a lot more than just chocolate and alcohol. So why do we have this reading today in Advent? Last weekend at St. Peter's, the college where I recently started as college chaplain, we had our Advent carol service, a service that starts with a reminder that Advent is a time of waiting for the first and for the second coming of Christ. The first is well known to us and involves the many familiar images of the nativity story with a baby in all his vulnerability. But the second coming is perhaps a little less familiar to us, or one that we prefer to not contemplate. We have a very graphic, albeit baffling and at times horrific account in the book of Revelation. I seem to remember that also has a white horse in it, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't a pub. Or perhaps you've seen medieval paintings portraying interpretations of the second coming. Many churches on the continent still have them, and there are a few that have been rediscovered in this country, despite many having been destroyed in the aftermath of the Reformation. These are often called doom paintings, as they show images of the doom that awaits those who sin, a focus on the judgment promised at the second coming, as set out in the passages, some passages in the Gospel, or indeed in the book of Revelation. But I want us to think today about why we're waiting and what we do in the meantime. Advent is not just a preparation for looking back at an event 2,000 years ago, but is also looking forward to this event, this second coming, at some unspecified point in the future, but an event for which we should be watching and waiting, and for which we should be prepared. Think about the story Jesus tells of the bridesmaids who forgot to bring spare oil for their lamps, and so couldn't get in when the bridegroom arrived later than they had expected. They weren't prepared. And it's very easy for us to get wrapped up in the busyness of our lives. But Advent is a time for us to pause, to reflect, and to prepare for the second coming, which might be this year, or might not. We just don't know. Except, part of it can be this year. It could be now. It can be this morning, this hour, even this minute, if you're open to it. Now, what on earth is he going on about? I suspect you're sitting there wondering. And I'm not talking about the second coming that is described in the book of Revelation with earthquakes and fire and a range of very confusing numbers of things. I'm talking about what's at the heart of the message quoted from Isaiah in this morning's gospel. And all the people will see God's salvation. And all the people will see God's salvation. Okay, so what's this going on about? What does it mean to see God's salvation? Now, I have a little bit of a problem here because I don't think you'll thank me if I say everything I really would like to say this morning. So I'm going to have to really summarize it. And what I need to do is I need to talk you through that great sweep of the story of God's people from creation story through their time in Egypt to the repeated turning from God that we have in the book of Judges, to the failures of Saul, the king one, not the road to Damascus one, his failures to be faithful to God, to the breaking apart into the northern kingdom of Israel and to the southern kingdom of Judah, to the repeated failings of various kings that we read about in the books of Kings and Chronicles, to the fall first of Israel and then of Judah, to the destruction of the first temple, the one that Solomon built, and then the exile into Babylon, and then the return and the rebuilding of the city walls under the direction of Nehemiah, through to the ignored warnings, the repeatedly ignored warnings of the prophets. Well, basically, it's the whole story right up until the birth of a baby in Bethlehem, around about the year 4 BC. This is a story of broken relationships, and though there is realization repeatedly that the relationship has been broken, and there is a sort of repentance for this, time and again we see that this turning back to God has been short-lived. Now, sorry, for a moment I need to get a little bit theological with you. Well, actually, I need you to get a little bit theological. You might remember in the first account of the creation story in Genesis, yes, there are two accounts of the creation story, but in the first one, we're told, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. What do you think created in the image of God means? Now, I don't think it can mean that I'm an exact photographic copy of God. But how can I be? Because if I am, then how can each of you also be an exact photographic copy of God when we all look so different? And I look different now to how I did 10 years ago, 20 years, 30 years ago. So I don't think that's what it means. Some scholars, including Tom Wright, former Bishop of Durham, think that the image of God tells us that we, humanity, were created to be reflections of God and of God's nature. Perhaps thinking of us as being like mirrors might help with the analogy. But just as mirrors can become distorted or clouded over time, humanity became a poor reflection of God and of God's nature. It started all the way back in the Garden of Eden and has continued each time humanity turned away from God and trusted in its own importance and greatness and reliance. Think about what happened to Nebuchadnezzar when he congratulates himself for the greatness of Babylon in the story of Daniel. You see, this turning from God is a continuing theme throughout the whole of the Old Testament. Again and again and again. Furthermore, we can never be God. Just as mirrors never are the thing that they reflect, we can never be God. But if we're not clouded or distorted, we can reflect God to those whom we encounter. But as I say, this mirror had become distorted and clouded. It no longer reflected God. Some small parts of the image of God might have been able to shine through, but overall the image had become obscured by the distractions of false gods. Think about the golden calf in the Exodus story, or of our own self-importance. Nebuchadnezzar again. We needed a reset. Continuing the mirror analogy, we needed to be taught how to more truly reflect God. Now, time doesn't allow an exploration of whether the human incarnation of God was always part of God's plan, but what is clear from Malachi, from the passage we heard quoted from Isaiah, and indeed from the message of John the Baptist, what is clear from all of them is that someone would come to show us God's salvation. Someone would come to enable us to restore the trueness and clarity of our mirrors. Someone would come to restore the relationship of walking and dwelling with God that had been lost in the Garden of Eden. Those of you who know the book of Revelation, you might think of the image we're told at the end of it, where we read, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them." Jesus, through living with us, through his teaching, through his death and his resurrection, is enabling us to restore our reflectiveness, to restore our relationship, and to restore the perfection of creation. Jesus is coming to save us from our distortions. And this is what we're waiting for in Advent. With the prophets, we were waiting for the first coming. Something that has already happened, something that happened in the past. We are still waiting for the second coming, something that will happen at some unspecified point in the future. But through following Jesus' teaching, through embracing the way of life he shows us, through following his path, we can once again reflect the glory of God and of Jesus to those around us. Something we can do now, this morning, this hour, this minute. Advent is a time for a reflective reset, a pause in the busyness we create for ourselves at Christmas, so that we can refocus on what the incarnation really means. I wonder, will you use Advent to work on cleaning your metaphorical mirror so that you are ready to reflect the glory of God? Amen.
When I was standing on the step looking down at the bits of tinsel that are there. And it's wonderful because there's so much happening in church. So the tinsel's there because yesterday it was the tea dance. There were about 85 people in here when I came, about 2:30. Those who have go to the Dementia Cafe and their carers, the volunteers, the dancers, and lots of other people, and some little people as well. It was a real joy. And it's wonderful that that can happen. We're all back worshipping this morning, and then this afternoon it'll all get changed again, I think, because it's the Choral Society concert at 5 o'clock. They put up the lights and they'll be dazzling. They were at the tea dance. And then next Saturday it's the Community Singers Choir, so it'll all get moved around. Next Sunday we've got 9 and 10:45, and then at 3 o'clock it's the Christingle. So it's our Connect, Create and Celebrate service. But it's open for everybody. So if you want the Christingle, come along at 3 o'clock on next Sunday. Then it is on the 22nd, our carol service at 7 o'clock. There having been a 10 o'clock service. So next week's normal, 22nd's 10 o'clock. And then we will do our outdoor nativity. It's going to be nice on Christmas Eve, as it has been for the last couple of years. We're going to do the same. And then we have our services in church. So much going on. Another one to invite you to is 10 o'clock on Thursday. There is our normal said service of communion that a number come to. And that's going to be followed by year 2 children from John Hampden Infant School coming to sing. Their teacher came in a couple of weeks ago and sang a bit, and I think she's very infectious in her singing. So if you want to come and have a bit of Christmas cheer on Thursday morning, then come along for that as well. I'm just going to my update to remind myself if there's anything else. Giving Tree, thank you to those who have given to that. If you've got something you haven't brought it in, can you get it in really by tomorrow, because it's all been collected on Wednesday. And a reminder about Food Bank. They have specifically asked that we do give sort of Christmassy things, so I'm getting to their list. Small Christmas cakes, chutney or pickle, boxes of chocolates, smash or powdered potato, peanut butter and fruit and jelly are the things they're particularly wanting this month. So particularly if it's in the next week or so, bringing some Christmas bits so they can have those as well. I think that's it.